Welcome to Science of Slength, the evidence-based poll podcast with me, your host, Dr. Rosie Boa. And just to be very clear, I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot treat or diagnose. I'm the type of doctor that does research and reads research articles. And that's part of what we're going to be doing together here in the podcast. We're going to be reading research. We're going to be synthesizing that down into things that you can apply to your poll practice. We're going to be talking with experts in their field and learning more. And overall, just really building our understanding of how bodies work, how we can do poll better, train more effectively, train more safely, and just have a better time overall. So if that sounds like something you're interested in and you want to come get a little bit nerdy with us, come on in. All right, welcome to a very exciting episode. So y'all may have heard me talk about Sally Radell's research before about mirrors and self-consciousness and body image in dancers. I want to say possibly in the episode about flow. I think I talked about self-consciousness in mirrors. But at some point I was like, I could just ask if she wants to come on the podcast. And she did. So I'm very, very excited. Like I said, I've been obviously you've got decades of work in research in dance. And I think it would probably be helpful for folks to learn a little bit about your background and what it is you do and your sort of areas of expertise before we get into the details a little bit more.
Sure. I have been dancing my whole life. I primarily identify as a modern dancer, but I've also been teaching ballet my whole life. Well, actually, no, I haven't been teaching. I studied ballet as a child. It's always kind of like something that modern dancers generally do to kind of help strengthen their technique. So I have started teaching mostly beginning ballet when I got into grad school, and then when I started my academic career. I strongly identify as a choreographer. I had a pickup company for years. I worked for as a dance critic for a while. I am a somatic educator. I'm very concerned about good self-care strategies. I'm the founding director of the Emory Dance program. I came here in 1987, actually when I was 2. No, I'm kidding. I was a lot older than that. But I started and built this program, and I owe the success to the amazingly talented faculty that we have here. And I've gotten into body image research, and I started that years ago in early 1990s. Basically, I was invited to be a part of a research team at Emory that was looking at body image levels in freshmen and looking at ways that it was impacted. So they invited me to bring dancers into the fold, which I was excited to do, even though I had never done this type of research before. And basically, what kind of got me onto the mirrors were that when we compared ballet students or dance students really with regular students, consistently the dancers had lower body image levels. And so my other researchers said to me, who were not in dance, well, why do you think that is? And I said, well, you're staring at a mirror for the whole class. And I knew that was not always, great for how you feel about your body. So they said, let's look at that. So we started running studies where I taught 2 identical dance classes, one with a mirror and one without. We started collecting data at the beginning and the end of the semester. We started looking at performance. We developed a scale that looked at technique advancement with and without the mirrors, and it's just kind of unfolded. And it's been, really, we keep discovering something new, and then that brings another question in. So it's an evolving agenda. And not many people are doing it, sadly. So I guess the good part about that is the field is wide open. There's a lot of people have read our research, which is, of course, exciting because, you want it to make a difference in the field. You want it to help people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely impacted my teaching decisions. And I know that we primarily looked at mirrors, but I also think a lot about, because I teach online, it's not really a mirror, right? To see yourself in like a Zoom window, but it's got some of the same qualities, right?
Yeah, you're looking at yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
An image of yourself. Yeah. But now, so do they do that when you're actually teaching, or do they look at you?
It depends. So this is something that I have noticed in some of my students is some of them, so there's an option on Zoom where you can turn off self-view, where you don't see yourself. And I've noticed that particularly some of the dancers, one of my dancers, Lauren, hi Lauren, who's a very accomplished freestyle dancer, very accomplished improviser. I do a lot of improvisation with my students. She turns off her self-view completely, so she doesn't see herself at all through class. And like, obviously I always have all my students up so I can see them because I want to know what's going on. Yeah, I think there's a lot of variation between in the same class, the experience that different students are having, whether or not they're seeing themselves on Zoom. And then also some folks will record themselves so that they can like watch it back later. And I don't think that's inherently a bad thing, particularly, I mean, we know from like the exercise science literature, recording yourself can really help with athletic performance. And if you're working on like super technical pole stuff and like, where does my arm go? I think it can be very helpful. But when we talk more about like the dance, the improvisation and finding that flow, I have noticed that it seems to be a little bit more of a hindrance. And I've noticed this for myself as well. Like when I take, just freestyle classes for myself, I turn my camera off, and it really, really helps me pay more attention to how I feel in my body rather than the visual stimulus that I'm creating.
Exactly. We found in our, so all the work I'm talking, all the things I'm going to say about mirrors have to do with the data that we've collected in dance classes. So the question is, how does it apply to pole? But basically the mirror takes you out of your body. And it causes you to look at an image of yourself. And especially if you see other images of yourself, there's a tendency to compare yourself, sort of a self-surveillance. How am I doing? How am I doing? And if you don't like how you compare, you start feeling bad about yourself. And a big problem with the mirror is it takes you away from your proprioception, just what you were talking about. A key thing in terms of dance skills is to be able to feel in your body what's going on. You have that feedback that is constantly being given to you through your muscular sensations. And if you have a mirror, it distracts you. It takes you out. So we have found in our studies that generally, actually in performance, especially in adagio, slow movements, that the dancers who use, we did a study where we looked at performance with the mirror and without the mirror and growth in a technical phrase. And the dancers who did not use the mirror and really were able to fully focus on their proprioception grew more technically in an adagio phrase than those that had the mirror. And we hypothesized that, you're constantly looking and you're distracted. You're not able to be fully present in your body, which is needed for optimal technical growth. Although one thing I do want to say is that one of our latest findings is that body image levels going into a class play a big role in how you interface with the mirror. We have found now, I think in 2 studies now, that dancers who walk into the studio, or students, because a lot of the data we collect is from beginning classes, so that we can control for what else they're doing in their lives. But what happens is if a dancer walks in, a student, and feels really good about their body image, really great, the mirror is not going to be a major problem. They feel so good about themselves that they're not constantly compelled to look at themselves and unproductively critique themselves. However, if you go into a movement class not feeling good about your body, with poor body image levels, then the mirror is going to make it 6 times worse. It's going to just magnify your self-criticism, your comparison with others, your distraction from really feeling the sensations in your body.
And I think that's, especially relevant for things like pole, because I know one of the things that you've worked on a lot is women specifically and women's body image in dance. And I would say the pole is overwhelmingly female as a discipline, perhaps more so than other dance disciplines. And obviously there's people of all genders who engage with it and, who come to my studio, but mostly it's women. My understanding of the literature is that in general, women tend to have worse body image than other genders.
Yeah,
in general.
We have only looked at women primarily because that's the sample size we're able to get. We occasionally get a few guys in our classes, but not enough to make a significant sample size that we can really use meaningfully in research. But so we just look at women, but actually in the literature, men have had body image issues in dance as well. But it's not as high as women. And I personally have not, my research team has not really looked at it because we just haven't had the population
Yeah.
available to us.
Yes, I I understand that struggle deeply. Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sort of overall, to sum up, decades of research, sort of your top findings are that, particularly for people who are already struggling with body image, mirrors can make that problem worse, and that,
Much
again,
worse.
in general, it seems to inhibit building proprioception and building this sort of sense of where your body is in space.
Exactly. That's very well put. Other things we've started to look at are attire.
Mhm.
Tight attire tends to make dancers feel not as good about themselves as if they had looser attire. We've also, it's mostly been mirrors and attire, but we're also starting to look at mental wellness. And a recent finding that we've just found that we're exploring further is resilience, that dancers who are impacted negatively by the mirror, it also impacts their levels of resilience. So it's more than just it goes deeper. It goes deeper. And I feel like we've just begun to scratch the surface in terms of the mirror. It's a very potent tool in the classroom that is generally overlooked.
Mhm.
Dancers aren't really aware of what the power that it has over them. For example, I was collecting data about a year or so ago, and I was walking into two beginning ballet classes, waiting for students to come in before class started. And the first class I walked into, the curtains were closed, and they were going to stay closed for at least the beginning of this class. So the students walked in, and the first thing they did was they put their bags down, and then they got down on the floor. They started doing abdominal work. They started warming up areas of their body that needed more attention. They were focusing on preparing their body and to take the best class possible. And it was, they were being, very attentive to their proprioceptive sensations and what their body needed. And the second class walked in, and the curtains were totally open, full mirror class. They put their bags down, and they walked right up to the mirror and started checking their hair and their alignment and their, just how did they look in their leotard, and checking their profile. And they were not preparing themselves to take a really, strong class. And it was like, yikes. Any teacher, look at this. How do you want your students to prepare? I mean, you want your students to have a satisfying experience. You want them to learn and to grow. And part of that starts with walking in the classroom and preparing to start. It was a very dramatic difference between the two classes' preparation habits.
Yeah, it sounds like a really stark contrast.
It
Uh,
was, and it was like, "Oh my god, just look at this, it's right there." And, the dancers don't think about it, they don't know about, I mean, it's you don't realize, teachers don't realize how powerful the mirror is. And that's
Yeah.
one thing I hope to get out there, is that, guys, look, there's real problems with using the mirror, and it starts with education.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know, something that I think a lot about is sort of I tend to take a sort of a sociological view of things. The way that dance education has sort of transformed over time, and it has
Yes.
this, particularly in ballet. Well, I would also say modern, right? It's like fairly structured, fairly regimented. There's like a strong like tradition sense, right, where like you do what
Mostly in ballet,
your
much,
teachers
I mean, there
tell.
is in modern, but, modern is about finding your own voice. It's about accepting all body types.
Mm,
So a lot of, when it started, there was the Graham School, the Lamone School, Cunningham School. So there was different viewpoints, but it's only evolved since then.
mm, mm.
Continuing growth and innovation are high priorities in modern dance. They are not in ballet. Ballet is a codified vocabulary that has changed very little in the since its inception in the court of Louis XIV. It's about conformity. It's about, you know, doing everything alike, well, in some work, but it's not that I would say there's no innovation in ballet, but it's not a high priority.
No, yeah, there's that more strong focus on tradition as opposed to coming up with
Correct.
new stuff, right? And you think about pole dance as a discipline. I mean, the first pole studio opened in, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was the late 90s or the early 2000s, right? And that's when
So
it
it's
started to
really
be
a new form.
really new, really new. And dance in the club, sometimes there are mirrors involved, but generally you're not dancing to yourself in the mirror. That's not how you get tips. Whereas opposed to dance in a studio, a lot of them do have mirrors. And it's really interesting to see how these sort of different traditions of movement have evolved. One very focused on, it's a very diverse space, but there is certainly like a thread in the discipline of creating very standardized movement and very structured movement. And I think particularly I think it's the Sport Pole organization has like a very sort of like gymnastics code of points. Here's the specific passes you need to have. They need to look like this in your routine, as opposed to, more free form, different
So
types
it's like
of
competitive dance in that there's very prescribed movement.
Yes.
See, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. In some, sort of alleys of pole, and then others, so Haute Velour comes to mind. So this is a much more freestyle, much more somatic, I would say, practice where, and Haute Velour is like a specific performance venue by Carmen Black and others, who's a dancer. She's very, very beautiful mover, but much more focused on like how the body feels and freestyle and expressing your own individual style. Right. So in pole, like in this one dance discipline, we have, lots of sort of
variation.
Yeah, ways of approaching.
You're in different threads. I have a question about pole. Now,
yes.
when you're in class and training, are there a number of you, or is it just a one-on-one thing?
Good question. So I would say for the majority of people, it is a group setting. Mostly I teach online. I've taught in person as well. Generally, it's a group. Depending on the studio, you may be sharing poles with someone else. There's also definitely like individual coaching, but I would say often that is for people who are more working on competitions and more working on specific technical skills. And I think that there are definitely people who do pole who would not necessarily call themselves dancers, who are more focused on the tricks and sort of like the more gymnastic aspect of it. And then there are people who are like, I'm never climbing, I'm never going upside down. This is a dance form that has a stick with it. So there's definitely a wide range, but usually when I teach, it's a group class, it's online, and then I'm also a big improvisational mover, so my classes also contain like a large chunk of improvisation, which I know is something that you do as well.
Yes. No, I think it gives you a chance, improvisation develops agency. It gives you a chance to find your voice and to explore your own sort of, creative ideas and your own potential. It's how some dancers learn the technical skills, because through improvisation, they sometimes do things technically that would be considered much more tricky or technical than maybe some of the standard moves. And that can be how you find your way in. When I was in college in my modern dance class, 3 days a week, we had a very structured modern class and focusing on, let's say, a certain types of turns. 2 days a week, we approached the same concept improvisationally. And that's where a lot of things clicked for me. And I took what I learned from improvisation into the more structured class, and it allowed me to really excel and really advance in my understanding of these technical concepts, because I had approached them from different, ways in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also definitely had that experience. I think a lot of folks who are both training technical and improvisation have, right? You're working on this trick, it's just not making sense. And then you put it in improv and it shows up one day. Yep. Yeah, for my pole dancers listening, scudoid is one of these ones for me. I could not do it. I'd been training it for like a couple weeks solid, like checking in with it a couple times a week. And one day I did an improv and it was just there. It's a, oh, wow, this is kind of hard to describe. It's a shape on the pole.
It got into your DNA and it just kind of came out of your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I want to say we've discovered in the research about mirrors is that if you take a mirror away, initially a lot of dancers don't like that, but then they adjust really quickly. They learn how to approach class differently from a very much of a proprioceptive focus, and then they end up not missing it. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. It's something that is alluring. It's so visual. And, we
Mhm.
live in a visual world, and visual images can communicate so much and can be so powerful. But if you cut that off and you just say, okay, now I'm going to focus on the proprioception, you may have to work initially a little harder, but that can be equally rewarding.
Yeah,
So,
especially for dancers who are interested in performing at some point, especially live. Very rare that you have a
yeah.
mirror you can perform
Yeah,
to.
exactly. And when you have a mirror, it impacts your training. I'm looking at myself, you're supposed to look this way, but you got to look at yourself in the mirror. I mean, it can really mess things up. It can be hard. I mean, I know that sometimes dancers will check something in the mirror, and I can, it's a complex issue. It's hard for me to say, oh, you should never use a mirror. But because it really depends on where's your body image, why you're using it, blah, blah, blah. But if I would have to, if a studio had to make a decision, I would tend to say take them out, only because even though they may not be problematic and a little bit helpful for some students, there's plenty of other students who will find them devastating to how they feel about their bodies and aren't even aware of it. They leave thinking, oh gosh, I'm so bad at this. And look how fat my thigh is. And my stomach sticks out. My butt sticks out. The problems outweigh, I think, the benefits. And then those who don't have a problem with the mirror, it's an opportunity for them to learn how to focus more on their proprioception and their kinetic feedback, which is what you need for a good performance. So it's hard because people don't want to give up the mirror. They just don't.
Yeah.
But it can be injurious on a dancer's body image long term. There's one study done in particular about looking at a group of women, I can't remember how many, but retired dancers 10 years out and people who've never danced 10 years out. The dancers, even though they were more physically fit, had much lower body image levels. I mean, it's something that kind of sticks with you. It kind of gets programmed into you. So one idea I had was that I wonder if there's a way to improve one's body image before you go even go into the studio. Before, because if you go in feeling great, you're developing resilience, and you're a better learner. But if you go in feeling bad, I just want to hug you. And it's hard. You see these dancers walking in the studio and, wearing these revealing leotards and tights and, looking in the mirror just grabs your attention and comparing themselves to others. And just, you can see them deflate, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's not what movement should be about. I mean, our body is to celebrate, it does great things. And movement is dance is a birthright. Liz Lehrman said that. And so it's complicated.
It is. It is. But I mean, especially with, again, I'm thinking about things in terms of pole, especially like beginning polers, right? Often for me, those are folks who are older. I would say most of my students are certainly above 30. I oldest student is in their late 50s, and there are certainly people who are far older than that who are doing pole, who like may not have had an athletic or a dance background, right? Like I did dance a little bit as a kid, but when I came to my first pole class, I was in my 20s and I was doing nothing physical, had bad body image from the jump. And one of the requirements of pole, especially as you advance technically, is you need to have skin exposed. You don't necessarily need to have skin exposed. You can wear sticky garments. I have found that they don't fit me. Many of the brands, the largest size is too small for me, which is just sort of an
They
issue
make
that
them too small. The dance attire is under, it's the sizing never works. I mean,
Yeah.
large is like this big.
which probably plays into negative body images, right? Because we have so much
Oh,
fat
yeah.
phobia floating around in society. And so you have this external focus that's like, here's how big your body should be. I don't care that it's the size that it is. So you have that sort of like floating around. And then also, with pole, I think starting anything new is going to be a little bit nerve-wracking. It's going to be a little bit like, ooh, I don't know about this. I'm a little bit nervous, right? Like I'm embarrassed. This is something I know I'm not going to be skilled at when I first start it. And then you have like the sort of like sensual taboo aspect. And then if you're starting technical stuff, you have to remove clothes or get like these super like sticky clothes that have to be tight to work. And like add into that, you know, you've got maybe a full mirror and like you're seeing yourself. And, you know, I am very pleased that I have a lot of diversity in body shape in my students. That's not true of all studios.
That's how women are. We're all different sizes and shapes, and it should be, you know,
reflected. Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciated and reflected in all that we do. How do you use the mirror I mean, do you find it to be well, I imagine online you've got their reflection. You've got to have that.
Yeah, so I'm watching in the Zoom camera. When I sort of set up my poll in my house, I made a conscious decision not to have mirrors in that room, so I don't have any. Some of my students have mirrors in their space. I don't think anyone has like a wall of mirrors. Some folks have like individual mirrors that are like smaller that they can hang up or put down. And oftentimes they'll sort of like put them on the floor and angled so that you can see them from a different angle, especially when they're doing poll work. But I would say that those are more about making it easier to see what's going on for me than it is something that they are looking at to get feedback in their movement. I very rarely will I see one of my students look in the mirror, except as like sort of a character exploration moment in some of their freestyle, right? Yeah, so it's really not something that I do a whole bunch for me, but it's certainly something that other people do. Right. A lot of online poll teachers will have like sort of multiple mirrors so you can see them from multiple angles. I get around that by doing stuff on spin poll. So it's rotating and you can see them all. So like a rotisserie chicken. Yeah, but it's definitely something that a lot of people in the poll community do use, and that I as a student, when I've gone to other studios, have found not great. Again, you know, I am not a large person, but it is not uncommon for me, particularly in more advanced technical classes, to be the largest person in the class, which is just part of it. And sometimes it's fine, and sometimes, you know, especially if I'm already nervous to be there and not feeling like very confident and resilient, I leave class being like, well, that sucked. I did not enjoy that. So yeah, varies tremendously. I don't use them. I know some other studios just straight up don't use them, particularly like more freestyle focused studios. Mm-hmm. I want to say S Factor is like a chain. I want to say some of the S Factors don't have mirrors. I don't want to say that for all of them, but a lot of studios do have mirrors, and a lot of studios are also, I think, drawing a little bit more on sort of that, you know, more structured teaching tradition that I would say is closer to ballet, and others are drawing on more sort of an improvisational.
Yeah, it sounds like it
tradition.
Depends on the sort of the style of pole that they teach.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, lots of variation.
That's really interesting. I really haven't ventured into that community yet, so this is all new material to me.
If you're interested, there's a lot of us, and it's also interesting. I mean, perhaps in the US, almost all adults. In Europe, particularly in Russia, I think it's a little bit more common to have children doing pole, but like I only work with adults, and I really only work with adults who are doing it for fun, which is part of the reason I found your research so helpful, because a lot of the sort of dance research has been on kids, which is fine, but kids are different. So I don't necessarily know that like results from children are going to transfer to, you know, adults.
In the research, I mostly have used beginning levels, which are the masses, which are what where most people are if they want to train in ballet or modern dance. That's where they start. So you have the most people there. So you start dealing with students who've had lots of training. It's really hard to control for if I'm collecting data, there are other experiences. They could be concurrent experiences in other studios that use mirrors. They could be rehearsing with mirrors. You know, it's everywhere. It's just easier to work with students who are primarily just doing ballet. I mean, I can get better data.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, especially because you want, you know, large enough sample sizes that you can make strong statements about how likely things are to have risen due to chance.
Right. Find meaningful significance. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So I feel like we've had sort of a good overview of your work. And I don't think you've published any research on improvisation specifically that I have found.
No, improvisation in mirrors.
Just in general.
You know, I haven't gone into that area yet. There's a fair amount written about research about improvisation. Now, I've been very focused on the mirror, mostly ballet, some modern students, some mixed level, but mostly beginning. It's just that we've kind of gotten, fine pointing. And the work that I do, I wish other people were doing it, but they're not. And I think it's just because it's really hard to collect the data, to have the, two classes, same level, ideally the same teacher with the same curriculum, and who's willing to sort of be a part of the study. So it's just not that easy. But I have a phenomenal team, the best statistician ever who can figure anything out. So yeah.
Participants are challenging. Yes, really. So before we wrap up, I think there's one more thread I'd sort of like to pull on from our conversation. Is you mentioned, we were talking about improvisation, you mentioned agency, and this is something that I think about a lot because, again, I'm working with adults, right? And we know that one of the things that's important from adult learners is to have this degree of agency and choice. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you found there?
We're starting to look at mental wellness, and as I mentioned before, we're seeing something with resilience, and of course with the role that body image plays. And we plan to go deeper into attire and how that sort of plays a role. One interesting finding that we found is that beginning ballet students, we found this in, I think, our 2004 study, and maybe it was our 2011 study, I think. We started looking at technical growth. And so we gave, at the beginning of the semester, we had all the dancers do the same adagio and allegro phrase. We came up with a system to evaluate technical skill, which we were thrilled because it has great inter-rater reliability. So we've used it a number of times. And what we found is that beginning level ballet students who use a mirror and have low skill levels really do better with the mirror, because what we hypothesized was that they don't have the skills to evaluate themselves technically. They don't see the problems. So what they see are themselves in the mirror at the bar, leotards and tights, a skirt, hair pulled back. They see themselves as a ballerina. And that image is really, really powerful. And we interviewed, it's a mixed methods. We're doing mixed methods work where, in addition to collecting data, we're interviewing a random group at the beginning and the end of the semester. And the lower skilled dancers in front of the mirror, and we got significance with this, really liked seeing themselves. Oh, I love seeing myself like a ballerina. I look so pretty and ethereal and elegant. It was sweet. It was so, the art form has got a lot of power. It's every little girl's dream, or not every, but many little girls' dream to be a fairy princess. You look at all the Disney movies are out. You want to be, a beautiful, elegant little girl. And in ballet, if you don't have the skills to be critical of your technical level, then the power of the image can be very impactful. So we found that a couple times. So that was really kind of interesting. So it's not like 100% we found the mirror is a problem. Those are kind of the two exceptions, two studies we found that. So it also attests to the fact that image is powerful. Visual imagery has a strong imprint on dancers, or people in general, but you see it in our studies. So that was kind of interesting that we found that.
I'm wondering if, I mean, this would be this would be hard to do, but what the effect of having like a photo shoot, perhaps where you're wearing heels, again, I'm thinking about pole, early in your pole career might do for you, right? Where you can see yourself being like, the sexy pinup, if that's something you're going for. I know not everyone is doing pole to be sexy, but if that's something that like students are interested in, I wonder if having that image of themselves,
you know what,
would affect their experience.
It could, it could. It just depends on, their skill and their skill in sort of seeing technical problems and their desire to want to be that hot pole dancer. It would be an interesting thing to try.
I would be. Yeah, if any of you who are listening got like a pole photo shoot very early on in your career, I'd be interested to hear how that has affected you.
Yeah.
Because I
Put those images up, those great images of yourself.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think I have
to.
any photos of myself doing pole until I became an instructor, and that was after 6 years. Like I have maybe I have like one photo that somebody else took because I didn't have a smartphone when I started doing pole. So
yeah, it's so easy now to photograph and film yourself.
Yeah, for better or worse. All right. Well, thank you. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and I'll put in the sort of the show notes, there'll be links to various papers if you want to read them. I find them very readable. So definitely would recommend that you check them out and sort of get some of the more details. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosie, for this opportunity to talk about my work.
Of course. Thank you for doing it. Like I said, it's been very helpful for me as an instructor, and I don't know, I think I know a couple studio owners listen to this podcast, so maybe food for thought for you as well.
Great. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. If you want to do more research on your own, if we talked about specific studies, I always try to have the citations in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself. A great place to continue our learning. Speaking of continuing your learning, if you do want to work with me as a pole instructor, I teach online at my online studio, Slink Through Strength, and it would be great to have you come join us. I teach freestyle flow, I teach conditioning, I teach flexibility, and I teach pole in the nerdiest way possible. But we have a good time, and we'd love to have you join us if that sounds like fun for you. And if not, no worries. Either way, I'll see you in the next episode. Have a good one.